أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: وأنكحوا الأيام منكم والصالحين من عبادكم وإمائكم إن يكونوا فقراء يغنيهم الله من فضله والله واسع عليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Today, more and more youth are delaying their marriage for a later time. Although many youth have reached the age of marriage and they are capable of getting married, but it seems that they are choosing to put it off and delay the event of marriage in their life. Some delay marriage after graduation. Some say, well, no, not just after graduation. I have to find a job. After finding a job, they say, I have to buy a house. After buying a house, they have to have a steady income. And so on and so forth until they reach their 30s, late 20s, early 30s, maybe in the mid-30s. Then they begin to want to look for a spouse and to think about marriage. Now this is what Western culture is all about. Western culture tells you not to rush into marriage. What's the rush? Graduate, go to school, have a steady income, get a job, buy a house, travel, have a good time. You only live once. You can date people. Why the rush to commit and to settle down with one person for the rest of your life and start having children? What's the rush? In Western culture, getting married at a young age is almost like a taboo. While, what's very not normal and what's very ordinary here in the West is to get married in your 30s, mid-30s, maybe even in your late 30s, when you're settling down to commit to one person. Now, is this something healthy? Is this something good to delay marriage? Or is it better to marry early? What does Islam say? Does Islam encourage an early marriage or a delayed marriage? And also, what are the pros and cons? I can tell you now that Islam encourages an early marriage. But will you be convinced? Not necessarily. We have to study the pros and cons of getting married at an early age. We look at the pros and the advantages, and we look at the disadvantages and the cons, and then we'll be able to reach a conclusion together, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. First off, when we say early marriage, what do we mean by early marriage? How early is an early marriage? If we were to say that Islam encourages an early marriage, what do we mean by early? How early are we talking about? Let's get this straight first, and then we could dive into the lecture. What we mean by early is nothing before 18. Not before 18. First of all, 18 is the legal age, and we have to respect the law of the land. And today, in many countries, 18 is the limit. And two, even if it wasn't the legal age, before 18, they're still kids. They're still kids. How do you expect kids to be having kids? Or kids to be starting families? So when I say early marriage, nothing before 18. 18 and above. 18, 19, 20. This would be considered an early marriage. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. So what are the pros of getting married early? Let's start with number one. Religion. Religion emphasizes, Islam emphasizes on getting married early and not to delay marriage for boys and for girls. The earlier, the better to get married. So this is something recommended. This is something that Islam advises and Islam promotes. So by getting married early, you're doing something recommended. This is something mustahab. It's something encouraged in Islam. However, at the same time, we have to examine the narrations that talk about getting married early. Do we take them for face value, or should we analyze them? Perhaps these narrations that emphasize on getting married at an early age, they could be contextual. What do I mean by that? I mean that some of these narrations might have been influenced by time and place. Let me give you an example. During the time of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, a 13-year-old child or a 14-year-old child was a man. He was already a breadwinner for the family. He was making income. He was not a child playing sports or video games, right? A 13 or a 14-year-old child, to us he was a child. Back then he was a man. He was supporting his family. He was making an income, right? But today, at 13 or 14, they're still playing video games. They're still kids. They're kids. Girls, you might come across a narration that says young girls should get married at a young age. Back then, an 11 or a 20 or a 12-year-old girl was mature. Don't compare them to young girls today. Right? Today, people could be 18 or 19 and they're still kids. Right? But back then, they were very mature. When you read history, if you read the history of the Ahlul Bayt and their children and their companions, right? And you see that they were smart. They were very mature. Al-Qasim al-Hassan, who we'll end the lecture inshallah with his musibah. At the age of 14, Imam Hussein alayhi salam asks him, what do you think of death? Because he had heard that all of the companions of Imam Hussein will die on the day of Ashura. So he told him, Ya bunay, wa kayfa al-mawtu indak? What do you think of death? He said, Wallahi ya am, fi nusratika ahla min al-asal. If death means to support you, then that death is sweeter than honey. He was only 14 or 13. This was the average age of these young men that were mature. So, coming back to these narrations that encourage getting married at a young age for boys and girls, we can argue that yes, getting married is good. But if you're mature, right, we have to take this into consideration. It's a difference of time and place. Back then, young kids were maturing faster. A young girl, maybe at the age of 12, she could be a mother. She could direct an entire house. Today, at 12 years, some of them, a lot of them they're still kids. They're still kids. A 14-year-old, boy at that age was a man, but today they're still kids. So we have to take this into consideration. That are these narrations and riwayat, are they contextual or are they general? If the Imam says let your kids marry at 14, it's general for all time. No. We have to reread these narrations. Perhaps they apply to different times differently, and different places differently. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi. But nevertheless, if we read, the narrations all together, they definitely encourage getting married at a young age. So this is one of the pros. Islam encourages getting married young, so you'll be fulfilling a religious obligation, or it's something recommended that you'll be fulfilled. Number two, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. marriage requires a lot of sacrifice. It requires a lot of compromising. It's two people coming together, putting a team together, making a family, raising kids together. Marriage requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of compromising. It can't be your way or the highway. No. Before getting married, when you were single, living on your own, or you're living with your parents, you're spoiled, it's always your way. It's never anyone else's way. It's always your way. You choose what you eat, you choose what you do, what time you go to bed, what time you wake up, what do you do at night, the friends that you hang out with, the sports that you play, whatever it is that you do, it's your choice. But when you get married, you're going to be sharing your time. You're going to be sharing your life. That means, the food that you like, you can't be eating it all the time because you have a partner that gets to decide what food they want. The time that you go to sleep, that's not up to you any longer because now you have a family. You have to be responsible. You have to go to sleep early and wake up in the morning early to go to work, to make a living. So marriage requires a lot of sacrifice, right? It requires a lot of giving up on things that you've picked up. Now, who is more likely to change and sacrifice and compromise? Someone who's 25 or someone who's 45? Someone who's 25 and has, some habits, some bad habits maybe. He smokes, he sleeps late, he sleeps in. Is he willing to give up on those habits, those bad habits? Which one is it easier at 25 or at 45? Of course at 25. A 45-year-old man, we tell him to stop smoking. Maybe he might do it, but there's a big chance that he can't. But a 25-year-old, he still can. A 22-year-old, he still can. He could still adjust. Same goes for a young lady. At 20, 21, 22, 25, she can adjust to her husband's need, to the family's need. She can be responsible. But at the age of 45, 40, 45, it's very difficult to adjust. Am I right or am I wrong? The older you become, the more difficult it becomes to give up habits. Whether they're good habits or they're bad habits. At the end of the day, you have to make sacrifices. You can't keep on doing, what you're doing all the time. I tell a lot of young men, this is very, very common in a lot of the communities that I go. A lot of young men, before getting married, they meet up with their friends, they go to shisha shops, or they gather at people's homes, and they get together for shisha, they hang out for 2 hours, and it's a way for them to relax. Okay. But when you're married, that's not going to be happening every night. That's going to happen once a month, maybe once every 2 months. Right? Maybe even more. I don't know. So it will require adjusting. My point is, the younger you are, the easier it will be for you to adjust. The older you are, the more difficult it is for you to adjust. And I'll tell you from personal experience. I don't want to generalize. I'm not going to generalize it. I'll tell you from my personal experience and from the marriage ceremonies that I've attended and from friends that I know. I've seen the ones that delay marriage to their 40s. They've never been married before. And they decide on getting married in the middle of their 40s. Many of them, a great percentage of them, maybe 60 to 70% of them, they end up divorcing. Why? Because they just couldn't get along. They've lived, independently for 45 years. Now there's someone telling them what to do in their life, whether it's a husband or a wife. It's going to be difficult, right? But when you do it younger, it becomes a lot easier. Number 3, let's remember that marriage is a form of protection. It protects us against shaitan, against temptation. Young people, they're faced with lots of temptations at school, at work, at the gym, at a restaurant. Wherever they go, shaitan is surrounding them. Temptation is surrounding them. So is it better? Is it not better that our youth safeguard themselves against temptation at an earlier age, when they can afford getting married. That is why narrations say, there's a narration that says, من تزوج فقد أحرز نصف دينه فليتق الله في النصف الآخر. He who marries has safeguarded half of his faith. He's guarded half of his faith. Half of his faith is protected. He needs not worry. Let him worry about the other half, the second half. When you're married, there is always going to be dangers. There's always going to be temptations. But when you're married, 80% of those temptations are guarded. 80% of those temptations, you're safeguarding yourself. Shaitan, you only leave him with 20%, 15%, 25%, right? He only has a little bit of room to work with. 80%, you've closed the doors of Shaitan. He can no longer come to you because you're married. You're protected, right? This is something very important. In societies where Shaitan exists and there's so much temptation, we should encourage our youth to get married at an earlier age. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Number 4, we live in a tough world. We live in tough times. There's so much competition. There's competition for good schools, good universities, good jobs. The market out there, there's so much competition. In any field that you want to go, you have to work hard. We don't live in a country where everything's easy and, income is easy. No, you have to work hard. You live in this country and you know, whether it's in the United States of America or the UK or France, generally speaking, in the West, in order to make a living, you have to really work hard. Sometimes that develops stress. It develops depression. You need support. You need moral support. You need someone that stands behind you, holds your back, and says, I'm with you. I'm supportive of you in whatever that you do, right? And that's where marriage comes in. That's where you need a spouse. Men need a wife, and women need a husband for support, for emotional support. Sometimes you just can't do it on your own. Life is tough, and it's full of competition. You need someone to help you, work with you, and show you emotional support and moral support so that you can go through the tough times. You can get a loan. You'll be in debt, but you can pay off those loans because there's someone there telling you, you can do it. I'll help you too. We can go through these tough times. But to live on your own, you'll be missing that companionship. You'll be missing that friendship. A lot of times we forget that marriage entails friendship, entails companionship. The best marriages are those where the husband and wife, they're best friends. They're not just husband and wife, but they're best friends. They come back home from work and they speak to one another and they share thoughts. They share the good times and the bad times, and they help each other go through it. That's a real marriage. That's a successful marriage. That's a helpful marriage. So yes, we live in tough times, but marriage could help. Marriage is not, an obstacle. Rather, it could be an asset. There's some people that say, we're living at bad times. The economy's bad. I don't even want to think about marriage. Why? Marriage could actually help you go through school. There's some, they say, as long as I'm in school, I don't want to be distracted. I tell them, you know what? You're thinking in a wrong way. When you get married, there will be less distractions. You'll be able to concentrate more. Don't think that if you get married, you're not going to be able to concentrate on school or on work. On the contrary, when you're married, when you safeguard yourself, when you have someone to protect you emotionally, financially, right? You'll be able to concentrate more on school and on your studies and on your exams. You'll only realize that once you get married. So marriage is not a distraction. On the contrary, marriage puts off distractions. In most cases, of course. There's always exceptions. But generally speaking, that's how it is. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. Number 5, marriage is your chance to start a family and have kids and have plenty of kids and enjoy your time with kids, right? You get to play with them. You get to travel with them. When you put off marriage, when you're in your late 30s, in your 40s, you've started a business, your business is doing well, you're not going to have time for your kids. All your attention is going to be on your business. How to make more profit, how to open another branch, right? You're not even going to make time for your kids. It's the honest truth. The older you are, the less time you're going to have for your kids, and the less energy you're going to have, whether you like to admit it or not. The less energy you're going to have for your kids. You're not going to be able to play with them, play sports with them, go out and have talks and understand them. That's very important, because the older you are, the bigger the age gap is going to be between you and your kids. You're not going to be able to understand your kids. You're not going to be able to understand their times and their culture and their pop culture, right? But if the age gap is small, it's 22, 23 years, 25 years, you still understand your kids. You'll be able to play with them, play sports with them, have talks with them, one-on-one talks. You know how important that is? To have one-on-one talks with your kids. At least, a couple of times a week, you talk to them, how they're doing in school, what are their challenges, who their friends are, where do they go, what do they do after school. This is so important that a lot of parents, they neglect. They think that, as long as they bring their kids to the mosque once a week, they've done their job. They tell them to pray, they've done their job. No. Parenting, a big portion of parenting is having talks, one-on-one talks with your kids. Even if you don't talk, listen to them. Listen to them. Let them talk about school, about their friends, about what they do, what their interests are. This is very important. And practically, you can do that more the younger you are. You can make more room for your kids, more time for kids. You can go out and you play sports. You can travel. You can travel with your kids, with your children, with your teenagers. But the older you are, the bigger the gap is, the less you will understand them, the less time you will have for them. And that's not good. At the end of the day, our children are the apples of our eyes. Al-malu wal-banun zinatul hayatil dunya. By marrying early, you'll have that opportunity. Okay, so we talked about the con, and we talked about the pros. Now let's talk about the con, because we have to be fair. Getting married early, does it have cons? Yes, absolutely. It does. Number 1, some youth are just still immature. They're irresponsible. He's 23, 24, 25, but he still thinks like a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old. There's still some youth, they're very immature and they're irresponsible. They want to get married, they rush into marriage, they force their mothers to find them a good-looking lady from the community, and they get into marriage. The person, he's irresponsible. He's still immature. He sleeps late, he wakes up late, he doesn't go to work, he slacks off, he doesn't want to get an education, he doesn't bring in the money, he wants to spend every night out with his friends, right? He doesn't spend time with his wife, he doesn't make time for his kids. What is that? That's a child. That's a teenager in the body of a 26-year-old or a 27-year-old or even a 30-year-old, right? So what's important is maturity. And maturity is relative. A 20-year-old person can be more mature than a 30-year-old, right? We've seen that. A 15-year-old can be more mature than a 25-year-old. Of course, as we said, that marriage, we're talking about 18 and above. But maturity, there's a lot of people They want to rush into marriage. It's good. Islam encourages getting married. But you have to be mature. You have to be wise. You have to be responsible. There are some youth, they can't take care of themselves. They expect to take care of a family. Their mother still washes their clothing. And their parents take care of them. And they give them their paychecks. Everything's taken care of. These kids, these youth, they're so pampered, and then they want to get married. It doesn't work. You have to raise a family. You have to be mature. You have to be wise. You have to be responsible. Marriage is all about responsibility. Don't forget that. This is one. Two, and this is very unfortunate. There are some youth, youth are energetic, and the hormone levels are skyrocketing. So a lot of youth, they decide on getting married for certain reasons, right? And we know what those reasons are. They're 20, 21, 22. They want to get married for certain desires, so they rush into marriage. They choose someone from the community, from school, Muslim, non-Muslim. For some people, it doesn't even matter, as long as they get married. Well, once those desires are satisfied, guess what? That marriage is off. That marriage is not going to work. Because those people, they got married for one reason. For one reason only. When those needs were met and were satisfied, what are they left with? An empty marriage. Because they married for the wrong reasons. They didn't marry that person because she makes a good wife or a good mother, a good spouse. No. For one reason, for certain desires, and those desires are met. And after 2 months, 3 months, they decide on getting married. They decide on getting divorced. So this is one of the cons. You have to ask yourself, why do you want to get married at the age of 22, 23, 24, 25? Why? Is it just for certain desires? Or because you want to start a family? Because you want to have kids? You want to be responsible? You have to ask yourself, if that is the only reason, it's not going to work. Right? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Number 3, there are some youth that rush into getting married in their early 20s, right? But they still don't know what they want to do in their lives. They find someone from the community or from another community, they get married, and then they're like, wait a second, I want to be a doctor. I want to move to California. Now that you got married, you decide on where you want to be, and where you want to live, and what you want to do with your life. You can't do that. Because that person married you thinking, for example, you want to be a teacher. Right? Thinking that you want to live here in Pennsylvania. Now you're telling them you have bigger ambitions, bigger goals. You want to live in another country. You don't want to have kids. Or you want to have kids in a special... You see, that's not going to work. A lot of kids, a lot of youth, they get into marriage without knowing what they want to do in life. Once they get married, after a couple of years, then they decide on what they want to do. Well, it might not work for your partner, for your spouse, for your husband, for your wife. They married you thinking that you have other plans. Now that you've changed the plans, who said they want to marry? They want to move to California or move to the UK? They want to stay here, right? So it's very important that before getting married, you decide what you want to do with your life. You want to do this in this country for this amount of time, so that when you marry someone, you're not fooling them. You're not giving them one impression of yourself while you want to do something else, because that's not fair. Right? That's not fair. So you have to decide before getting married what you want to do. One of the cons is that a lot of you, they get into marriage and they still haven't decided what they want to do with their lives. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Are there obstacles standing in the face of getting married early? Absolutely. One is the financial obstacle. There's a lot of youth, when you encourage them to get married, They'll tell you, I have financial difficulties. I don't have a job. I don't have a steady income. I don't own a house. I can't afford to get married. I can't afford a wedding. I can't afford the dowry. And so on and so forth. So the first excuse is money. Yes, this is one of the obstacles facing getting married at an early age. 2, parents. Now you might be 22 or 23 years old, 20, 21, I don't know. And you want to get married, and you found yourself a fabulous young lady, but her parents are saying no. You're saying you're still young. You don't own a house. How can I trust you with my daughter when you still don't own a house? When you don't have a steady income? I want to trust my daughter with someone that's going to take care of her. My daughter is spoiled, and I expect you to spoil my daughter as well. Right? Of course not. Not everyone says this. But they want their daughters to be taken care of, right? If you have a daughter, you want your daughter to be taken care of. So if someone who's 21 or 22 or 23 comes and proposes, you might have doubts, right? Because you want your daughter to be well taken care of. You don't want her to, to live in somewhere that's she's not well taken care of. So 2, the second obstacle is parents. And 3, culturally, it's not well known. We live in a society in which youth at a young age are not getting married. So it's not culturally acceptable. Now finally, before I conclude, what is my advice to the youth today? Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi. My advice is, do not keep on delaying marriage. At the end of the day, you're only getting older. You're not getting any younger, right? Don't delay marriage. The more you put off marriage after graduation, after work, after settling, after buying a house, okay, well guess what? By now, you're 33 years old. You're 30 years old. Your options have increased or decreased? Decreased, obviously. The older you get, your options are decreasing. And the same thing with young ladies. The more they wait to get married, the more they approach their late 20s, 30s, mid-30s, the options reduce. And the amount of suitors, the amount of proposals will reduce. That's very logical. So the more you wait, the less options you will have. And the less options you will have, the less happy you will be. Right? While getting married early, in your mid-20s, for example, early 20s, mid-20s, you will have more options. So this is one advice. But 2, you must be ready. You must be ready. You can't get married early just for the sake of marrying early. Just because the Sayyid said you have to get married early. No, you have to be ready. Emotionally, psychologically. You have to be ready for marriage. You have to be responsible. If you don't want to take on that responsibility, don't do it. It's just like a job. There's a job that requires you to get up at 5 in the morning and come back at 9 in the evening. You have to be ready for it. That job might pay well, but if you're not up to the, to the level, if you're not responsible enough, don't accept that job. Don't accept that position. It's the same thing with marriage. You have to be ready to take on a responsibility, to start a family and take care of that family, whether you're a husband or a wife. So don't get married just for the sake of marrying early. You have to be ready. Number 3, my advice is, those that say, I'm going to wait until I graduate, find a job, get a house. No, you don't. No, you don't have to wait that long. You don't have to wait until you buy a house. You don't have to wait until you become a doctor. You can get married before that. It's not a big deal. By that time, you're going to be in your mid-30s. You're going to pass the train. The train is going to, it's not going to wait for you. Don't wait that long. And finally, rely on Allah Azza wa Jal. Tawakkul ala Allah. You might not have 100,000 in your bank account, but you have Allah Azza wa Jal who will help you. And the Quran, there is one place the Quran says Allah will make you rich. Allah will give you. It's regarding marriage. Regarding marriage, Allah says, don't worry about marriage. إِن يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاء يُغْنِيهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَاللَّهُ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Allah is all rich. He gives. Don't worry that today, the economy's bad, and I don't know about my job. No. Depend on Allah. If you are serious about marriage, and you found the right person, and you are serious, you are responsible, and you have your parents' blessings, depend on Allah, and Allah will surely help you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. Now it's Thursday night. It's Thursday night. Let's give our hearts, our bodies are in the U.S., but our hearts, let's put them towards Karbala. There was a youth in Karbala that was at the age of getting married. His mother wanted to see his wedding. His uncle wanted to see his wedding, but he did not have that wedding. Al-Qasim ibn al-Hassan, he comes to his uncle Imam Hossein alayhi salam asking for permission to enter the battlefield. The Imam said no. Al-Qasim was only 4 years old when his father died. For 10 years he lived with his uncle. He was raised in his uncle's house. How could Imam Hussein give him permission to enter the battlefield and to sacrifice his life? Al-Qasim began crying and weeping. Moments later he comes and he gives a letter to Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein reads the letter, and it's from his older brother Imam al-Hassan, requesting him to give permission to Al-Qasim to fight. He told him, my brother, a day will come in which you have no supporters and you have no one to fight and defend you. My son Al-Qasim, don't reject him. Allow him to fight along with the soldiers, along with your companions, along with your children. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he takes Al-Qasim and he hugs him. And then he brings the turban of his father, Imam al-Hassan, and the copy of the Quran of Imam al-Hassan and his sword, and he gives it to Al-Qasim. Al-Qasim puts the turban of his father on his head. He carries the sword of his father. But before he enters the battlefield, he goes and he says farewell to his mother, Ramla. My mother, I bid you farewell. I'm entering the battlefield, and the next time we will see each other will be in Jannah. Imagine the sorrow, the pain of Ramla, sacrificing her young son, who she wanted to see his wedding. She wanted to see him get married. But all those hopes and dreams went away in Karbala. Al-Qasim enters the battlefield. He begins to fight fiercely. Moments later, Imam Hussein alayhi salam heard shouts coming from the battleground. Amma alayka minni salam. فهذا جدي قد سقاني شربة من الماء لا أظمأ بعدها أبدا. Imam Hussein wishes to him. He sits next to his body. My nephew Al-Qasim, يعز على عمك أن تدعوه فلا يجيبك، أو يجيبك فلا يعينك، أو يعينك فلا يغني عنك شيئا. My dear nephew Al-Qasim, it is very sad for me that you call me, but I cannot help you. Imam Hussein carries Al-Qasim back to the camp. He lays him next to Ali al-Akbar. In the Maqatil, they say that Imam Hussein, he stood at the camp in a tent where Ali al-Akbar was on his right side, Al-Qasim was on his left, and he kept on crying, crying for his son and crying for his nephew. As Sayyidah Zainab comes, she says, Akhi Aba Abdullah, can you please leave the tent? Why? Why should I leave the tent? She said, because Layla and Ramla wish to come and sit next to the bodies of their children. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. اللهم ادخل على أهل القبور السرور. اللهم اشفي كل مريض. اللهم داوي كل جريح. اللهم اكسو كل عريان. اللهم أشبع كل جائع. اللهم اغني كل فقير. اللهم اقضي دين كل مدين. اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك، وغير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك، واقض عنا الدين وأغننا من الفقر، فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان، أو يطلع الفجر من ليلتي هذه ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه، ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والشهداء نقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.